Morning, everybody online. It is almost the last day at COP. We are almost there at the finish line, although I do hear we still have a lot of stuff to negotiate. But welcome to the Africa Pavilion. Welcome to this event on unlocking finance and innovation for building urban resilience in Africa. It's my absolute honor to welcome you to this event and to welcome these fantastic panelists that we'll have with us here this morning. Thank you so much for coming out this morning and joining us at the Africa Pavilion. I'm Lea Ranalda. I'm at UN Habitat working on cities and climate change, and I'll be your moderator for this morning. And before I start and hand the word to the fantastic panel that we have, let me at least give a brief overview of what we are discussing here today and framing that discussion a little bit. There is a dual challenge that we're seeing here in the context, and that's the rapid urbanization and extreme weather events in Africa. And let me just drizzle that up a little bit more in detail. Africa is responsible as a continent for almost none of the emissions. 4% of emissions right now, 4% of historic emissions, and I think 5% of current annual emissions. So really, in the broader picture of things, responsible for a very low share of the emissions. It's a rapidly urbanizing continent that will see a lot of population growth, but it's already bearing the impacts of climate change very heavily. Rising sea levels, flash floods, cyclones, droughts. So it's really a place where these impacts of climate change that we've seen at the global level are particularly felt. And just to name some of these events by name, it's the catastrophic floodings in Libya, it's Freddy, of course, in Southeast Asia and Southeastern Africa, heat waves all across the continent. And at the same time, we do see urbanization. We see a growing building stock. Much of the buildings that will stand on the continent have not been built today, so there is a need for planning, for infrastructure, but also for services in cities and beyond. But I don't only want to talk about grim things. Of course, Africa as a continent is also a hotspot for innovation. We need to turn some of these challenges actually into opportunities and talk on the potential that also a transition to a greener economy would offer. So that we see cutting-edge technology, nature-based solutions. We can build climate-proof infrastructure, build on participatory city planning processes, find innovative financing models to really make that shift happening. So what we want to do today is dive a little bit more deeper into this topic, really thinking about how we can integrate climate thinking into housing, into waste management, into energy, into transport, and also what we need to do in order to close these finance gaps that we are seeing. So with that, welcome again to this event hosted by UN Habitat and by ARC. Am I saying that right? It sounds very trendy if I say it like this. And with that, I'll come and join the panel and introduce you all one by one, and looking forward to a really lively discussion with all of you. Thank you. I heard I need to give it 3 seconds before it turns on. There we go. So maybe just to say for the audience, we want to make this a lively discussion. So I'll ask each of you a question to introduce yourself, give a little bit of your background and what you're doing in your work, but then also I'll have a second question for you. But if there's anything you want to know from each other, please do feel free to chime in. We want to make this an interactive discussion so we can all build on each other and learn from each other. And with that, we want to talk about the intersection of finance, innovation, and what we need to do to unlock some of these partnerships for the continent. So I will first give the word to Kofi Kunin from Africa Risk Capacity, ARC for short, I mean, I'd love if you can introduce yourself a little bit specifically on the question that we know that early warning systems and rapid access to financing are critical for disaster prevention. And if you can tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing, some of the risk models and products that ARC is working on and that you have developed to really help African governments improve their capacity to better plan, prepare, and respond to extreme weather events. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Kofi Konen, Head of Government Services for East and Southern Africa at African Risk Capacity. And as you may have noticed, African Risk Capacity is a special agency for African Union with the mandate to support AU member states to strengthen their response mechanism against a disaster that really affect the African continent. So to achieve that mandate, we believe that in order to be able to manage effectively the disasters, there is a need to quantify the risk. And how do we quantify the risk? We quantify the risk by bringing in some innovative tools, innovative risk modeling, which combines characteristic of events, hazards, with sort of exposure, but also vulnerability, just to model the populations at a risk, as well as the economic losses. That's what's the purpose of the risk modeling, to really quantify the risk, define the risk profile, and based on that, then we can come up with some sort of response mechanisms. In terms of models, a risk model that African Risk Capacity has developed so far, ACA was established 2012. We first started with a drought model, which focused on crop areas, and then later on we also extended it to resilience, just to make sure that some of our member states that have important livestock, right, they also have important tool to address some of the issues that impact. Then we are mindful that in Africa, not all the countries face droughts. While some countries are facing droughts, we have other countries that also face other disasters. Then in 2020, we developed a tropical cyclone model, especially targeting 6 countries in the Southwest Indian Ocean countries: Madagascar, Mozambique, Comoros, Seychelles, Mauritius, and Tanzania, just to support them to also address. Again, not droughts and tropical cyclone, we have flood, which is the man needed. Many of our member states face drought, flood. So we started the development of flood model, which was finally launched this year in June. And many of our member states actually are in preparations to have insurance coverage for that. So those models that we put in place not only serve as early warning tools. For instance, for the drought model, helps countries, for instance, during the agriculture seasons, to monitor the season, to see how the season progresses. And then, not only in the M&E process, the monitoring process, but also those models can trigger some fundings for member states to respond. For the drought, for instance, you may have noticed only last year, for instance, Malawi, we have a Malawi rep in the panel. The government of Malawi received 14.2 million as a result of the drought that the country faced. Many countries, last year we paid about 65 million USD to some of our member states. And then on tropical cyclone side, Madagascar has been the one joined when we started. Madagascar received a payout last year in February as a result of tropical cyclone Batsirai. And this year, 1.2 million as a result of cyclone Freddy. So these are the tools that African Risk Capacity put in place to ensure that it responds to the need of member states. Maybe lastly, for your information, in addition to those risk modeling tools, we also have other tools like outbreaks and epidemics, because we believe that some of the disasters like flood also generate some sort of waterborne diseases. So member states, as a result of Ebola 2015, request us to develop other tools to help African countries to contain some of the epidemics and outbreaks, but also provide rapid funding when those disasters occur. So I can stop here for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the breadth that you just took there in terms of topics, and especially also reminding us it's not only the heat waves, it's also the floods and the cyclones and really these flash floods that the continent faces, and the importance of data. Really saying without quantifying what you're seeing, it's difficult to access money, because to say I felt like there was a flood is often not good enough. You need the data, the hard data, to quantify the models to really trigger that finance. So thank you so much for making that point. And you made my job very easy, because as a last point you speak about tools, which of course is the perfect segue to hand the word to my colleague, Fushina, who's at the Regional Office for Africa at UN Habitat, to tell us a little bit more about. We know that the climate battle will be lost or won in cities, apologies, and what UN Habitat is doing, what tools and resources UN Habitat has to support cities, to support member states in really making that transition happening, and also what are some innovative mechanisms that you work with to unlock some of that finance that is very much needed, and that Kofi also just referred to. Fushina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leah, and good morning, everyone. So Kofi talked about the need to quantify risk, which I think is very, very important. What we're also looking at UN Habitat is the need to also understand the spatial implications of risk, as well as the socioeconomic and environmental implications. So really what we're doing is we're taking a longer-term resilience-building approach to disaster risk prevention and management in African cities. The tool that I would like to talk about, which is really in many ways an innovation that UN Habitat features, is a participatory resilience planning tool called CityRAP. That stands for City Resilience Action Planning Tool. And this tool is really geared ultimately towards attracting financing, towards helping cities be able to build their capacity to attract climate financing for their projects. And the way it works is that in order to be able to attract financing, cities need priorities. They need to know exactly what are those key interventions that they need to undertake to maximize the benefits to the populations, to the safety and well-being of the residents of the city. They also need plans. They need data, as that's already been mentioned. They need the evidence base to be able to explain to donors, to the national government, to financiers, to the private sector, what exactly is the challenge and what is needed to address it. They certainly need political will, so local leadership, but they also need community buy-in to guarantee sustainability. And finally, they need to be able to show capacity to undertake the kinds of interventions that are needed for a holistic resilience-building approach. So what this CityRAP tool does is that it promotes the concept of integrated resilience building. So the idea here is that instead of doing multiple different kinds of disaster prevention and climate actions in silos, is to really look holistically at what are the key challenges in a specific urban area from all the different aspects of resilience. So looking at the disaster risk, the disaster prevention component and dimension, but also looking at the social, looking at the economic, looking at the environmental, really taking a holistic approach. The actual process of CityRAP, the tool is geared mainly towards secondary cities. We've actually implemented it already over 35 cities in Africa, so it's quite, let's say it's already a solid proof of concept there. It works. Why secondary cities? I think we could elaborate on that a lot, but essentially we really see secondary cities as nodes of opportunity for sustainable development in the region. We still have opportunities with secondary cities to plan in a more risk-aware way, and of course taking climate priorities into consideration. So CityWrap is implemented over about 3 to 4 months. It is a series of exercises and actions. The municipality is the leader of the process, but it involves all the key urban stakeholders. So we involve the communities, we involve different social groups, community organizations, women's organizations, youth organizations. We involve small and medium enterprises, the private sector, educational institutions, academia. And so the idea is that all of these different urban stakeholders get together, and through these various different exercises, they gather evidence and data, both quantitative and qualitative, through things like participatory mapping, municipal self-assessment, to really understand what is going on in their city in terms of disaster risk, to already tap into the local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge about potential solutions, and then to begin to prioritize all the different challenges, but also actions that can be taken to address the challenges in a holistic way, to in the end come up with what we call a resilience framework for action, which basically determines, what are those 4 to 6 key priorities that if the city is able to implement would really have the most significant effect. And as I mentioned, we have already implemented this in about 35 cities, and we also have a showcase project funded by the Adaptation Fund in 4 countries, Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, and the Union of Comoros, where in partnership with Oxfam, who we will also hear from, we're demonstrating how we can go from this resilience planning through to financing and then through to implementation. Because what is unique about this process, and this is the final note that I want to end on, is that as the cities develop these resilience frameworks for action, they're essentially also developing bankable projects that they could take to financiers, that they could propose for investments. And they don't even know it, actually. It's quite an interesting, it's a really nice experience when towards the end of the process, the cities, they realize what they're actually holding in their hands, that they have bankable project proposals that they can take directly for financing. And so through this Adaptation Fund project, we showcased how that works, how you go from having this plan to then tapping into different financing sources to actually implement the plan, and then implementing the plan. So that's things like, let's say, for example, in Morondava, Madagascar, the plan involves the building of elevated roads, bridges, nature-based solutions like mangrove rehabilitation, public parks, an evacuation center, and a flood early warning system. So that's just an example of one such framework. And actually now almost all of those infrastructures and capacity building measures are already in place. So that's really where I would like to end, is to say that it is a very simple tool, but it's an innovation in the sense that it really enables secondary cities, municipalities to tap into different financing mechanisms and to have these bankable projects that they could then execute.
Thank you so much, Fushina, and again, making my job as a moderator incredibly easy, because you segue very well into the next speaker. But maybe just to quickly sum up and also add, the CityWrap tool is fantastic, and what's of course also great is you give cities the tools at hand so that they can do what they need to do. And it's a very participatory approach and tool. So you're not only brewing something up in an air-conditioned city office somewhere on the 20th floor, but you're really talking to people. And again, when you have these requests for, okay, well, how bankable is your project and who have you talked to? It means you have talked to a variety of different approaches and different people. And I think maybe also to say, and that's, please don't quote me on these exact numbers, but here at this COP, the percentage of participants coming from the Global South is significantly lower than the ones coming from the northern hemisphere, I think it was 20% only. And then the share of these coming from actually populations that are deeply impacted and vulnerable to climate change is even much, much lower. And this is also to say, I mean, we speak about climate change impacts, and it hits us all, but it doesn't hit us all equally. Yeah. It depends, are you rich or poor, and how vulnerable you are to climate change, whether you will be deeply impacted by it. If you have money, you can still, if it gets really hot, you can afford air conditioning, a nice car, and you will be able to move around. If you are not, the situation looks a lot worse. And as a last thing before I give that word to you to speak a bit more about that, is of course, even within a city, these contrasts can be incredibly different. Also in terms of green spaces, where you live. If you look at a city map, where are the green spaces? It's where the more wealthy people live. Where are the concrete jungles? It's where the more vulnerable people live. Of course, that's why also much more exposed to extreme heat and all the other risks that come with that. So with that, I'd really like to hand over to Lebogang from Oxfam, South Africa, to speak about this perspective of what, again, a city is only as strong as its weakest part, and you have extensive experience working with the most vulnerable populations also in cities. And if you can share some of the innovative approaches that you have worked on to support African cities, some of the successful initiatives, provide some strategies, some examples that your organization has worked on to really enhance resilience on the ground and sustainability, and what needs to be done to also, to face these escalating climate change challenges.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. As you have said, I come from Oxfam, South Africa, and we are an affiliate in a confederation of 20 affiliates that have a presence in 85 countries. And we really work with marginalized communities to challenge and transform systems that perpetuate poverty and inequality. And as Oxfam South Africa, we do that in Southern Africa. I mean, I think all the panelists have spoken about the fact that there is going to be rapid urbanization, particularly in Africa. And a number of people go into cities for various reasons, for looking for employment opportunities. But we are also going to see with the climate challenge that a lot of people are going to be displaced, either because of hunger, because crops don't grow because of drought, or because of flooding. What we are seeing in South Africa is also the political instability and the economic instability in our neighboring countries. And the places that will bear the brunt of this displacement and this rapid urbanization, rapid moving into cities, are the cities themselves. And I guess what this crisis is asking of us, apart from recognizing and developing the tools like has been shared by my colleagues, is how are we able to reimagine our world? Because climate change is here with us. It's no longer something that we are projecting that is going to happen in the future. But it's also asking us to reimagine our governance. You know, long is the time gone of a few individuals who are elected, speaking amongst themselves and leaving out communities that they serve. But it's also asking us to reimagine partnerships. What are the kind of partnerships that we basically can come up with? And I'm very proud of the work that we have done, some of it in Madagascar and Comoros, supported by the Adaptation Fund and in partnership with UN Habitat. Because in fact, what you need is to ask the people that are most affected by the problem that you are trying to address around what are some of the solutions that they would like to come up with. And local government at this point in time is a key contributor, because in fact they are the ones that when a disaster happens, they are the ones that must respond immediately. So what does that look like? What it looks like, it means that we need to make sure that whoever is sitting around the table to plan is the one that is mostly affected by the climate change or the potential disaster. But that also helps because in a lot of ways, governments and countries, and including big business, we respond after the fact. But the people that are living in these communities, if you look at some of the overpopulated cities around Johannesburg, are the people who themselves have found ways of living with each other, even if they are living in a very small space with very limited resources. But also we need to ask ourselves when we do this, who is often left out of this conversation? And in a lot of instances, it is women who are left out of this conversation. It is LGBTIQ plus communities that are left out of this conversation. It is people living with disabilities that are left out of this conversation. And it is young people that are left out of this conversation. So the tools that enable us to bring together all the stakeholders across the table help us to make sure that we do not leave any voice behind. So what we have achieved by working in this manner is that in Johannesburg, in a city called Ekurhuleni, just in the east of Johannesburg, we have worked with waste pickers. These are often people who are driven to waste picking while they create a common good with the community, but they are driven to waste picking because of lack of opportunities. It is mainly women. We've brought them together and we've created 6,000 jobs. And right now, they are 70% owners of for-profit entities that are basically partnering with a private sector, with Unilever, to basically start a company where they themselves are going to be shareholders. In Madagascar, in Comoros, we've created 4,700 jobs, mainly for women. We have built with the local government, with the inclusion of communities, 5 infrastructure projects, 3 being to build bridges, but also 2 to build high elevated roads in Morodova with urban greening. What that means is the fact that the solutions that we have created in this country is not only about the infrastructure, but it is about co-creating early warning and early action systems for a community. It is about a community being part of understanding when disaster strikes, what is it that we are going to do? It is also understanding that there are natural resources and very cheap ways in which you can create systems like planting mangroves and other crops that will also ensure that you mitigate some of these systems. But where we also need to move to is to understand what are some of the technological advances that are there. How are we going to harness technology? And in the field of technology that I feel very passionate about is that often we see community members as consumers and not creators. And I think the next level of thinking about how do we build urban resilience is to build on what technological platforms are there, so that a small-scale farmer sitting somewhere trying to grow food is able to know how can they adapt their crops and how can they link to others. So it's about knowledge learning, it's about knowledge sharing, but it is also about how can communities act and become part of the entire value chain in producing food. Because apart from mitigating disasters, the other big disaster that we are speaking about and we should pay attention to is that of hunger. And unless we also support small-scale farmers, urban farming, making sure that people are able to grow their food, we are going to be seeing, the impact of climate and not building resilience in communities in other areas like health, the health of a nation. And I'm very glad that my colleague also spoke about waterborne diseases, because climate has an impact on so many other aspects of community life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And to also really remind us again, we're getting some tech fixing there, to really also remind us that it's not about climate change only. It's about how that also triggers and trickles into everything else, into waterborne diseases, into hunger, and what that means for hunger, and also that aspect of when disaster strikes, it is the local communities that need to respond first. So And as a side note there, it's the local communities that need to respond first, but it's also the local communities that are closest to the people. How many of us know the president or have ever met the president? But how many, especially in secondary cities, have maybe had the chance to speak to somebody sitting on a city council or the mayor, and potentially even? It feels a lot closer, these levels of government feel a lot closer to many of us. So really that link of, we need to also think about what role cities have when it comes to responding to these crises. I also just we had a tech problem here. I had a tech problem on my phone, so I'm now on my laptop. So apologies if it looks like I'm a bit decked out here in the corner, but we deal with the challenges on a morning. Is it a Monday morning? It's a Monday morning, right? So of course, after a weekend that didn't really feel like a weekend. Anyway, with that, let me turn to my last speaker on my very, very right, Annie, who is from the government of Malawi. So, you've had now the chance to listen to some of the interventions from the other panelists. So, of course, feel free to build on that. But also, you have experienced the tropical storm Freddy in March this year, which, of course, had devastating impacts in Malawi, and also clearly signaled that disasters are no longer just isolated in rural areas. They very much are impacting our cities. So what has Malawi learned from this, from Freddy? And can you tell us a little bit more also about the financing needs that are maybe triggered by this? And how can partnerships and support from organizations like ARC, but also like UN Habitat, support in potentially also meeting these needs? Annie, last but not least, word to you.
Thank you, and good morning. So, indeed, Malawi has learned a lot from the previous disasters that we've had. Talking of in 2015 when we had Cyclone Chadza, and in 2019 when we had Idai, and the recent one, Cyclone Freddy, early this year, Malawi has learned a lot. And these disasters, these major disasters, have affected the urban areas as much as in the rural areas. And previously, we have focused mainly in the rural areas. But we've learned with time that they are having devastating impacts in the urban areas. So there are a number of measures that have been put in place to make sure that even the urban areas, they are resilient to these major disasters when they happen. So in terms of because of the urbanization that the country has been having, we find that people are living in areas that are not safe. And most of those areas are the ones that are hugely impacted by when it comes to disasters. And with the economic recession that the country is facing, we've seen that there's urban poverty as well. And with that, we have also incorporated the urban population in the social safeguards. For instance, right now we are implementing the lean season food insecurity response program. Previously, the urban population were not included in that program. But and now we include them, and we respond using the urban cash transfers. And we also have the Climate Smart Public Works program, whereby they're supposed to rehabilitate some of the degraded areas. We call it Cash for Work. So that's one way also of trying to make sure that the urban population is also resilient to some of these disasters. And speaking of government efforts in terms of how we are collaborating with different partners, our donors and some of the humanitarian partners, we had also the Kuchi program, what we call, when we had the COVID-19, also. That's when I think the COVID-19 also exposed a lot of urban poverty to make sure so in that coach program, we provided also cash transfers. And from the support that we've also received, to mention, I think UN Habitat also mentioned about the city wraps as a tool that has been used in a number of cities in Malawi to help to identify some of the critical vulnerabilities in the urban areas that require the resilience support. And right now, with the coming season, as a country and as government, we are undertaking some of the preparatory activities to prepare for the upcoming season. And some of them include the undertaking the risk assessment, developing the multi-hazard contingency plans, because previously we haven't involved urban councils in terms of developing the contingency plans, but looking at the trend now of the disasters, they are also part of the contingency planning. And also we are establishing the urban tailored telemetry community-based early warning system. I think my fellow panelists also talked about it to say we need these early warning systems for floods, for the urban population to be aware, to be able to prepare when such events occur. And also we are developing the evacuation plans in case of emergencies so that we know where the affected population can go and the evacuation routes as well. And also with the cyclone Fred that we experienced, especially in one part of the city whereby we had the devastating impacts of Cyclone Freddy, government has undertaken efforts to make sure that we relocate some of the households that are living in that area. So relocation efforts are in place, and with the new Disaster Risk Management Act that we have, that was just recently approved early this year, it has given us some mandate now to be able to relocate some of the households to safer places. So those are some of the preparatory activities that as government, as Malawi, is undertaking to make sure that we prepare for the next season. And also with Cyclone Freddy, we've developed what we call the National Disaster Recovery Framework. And we know that the housing sector was the one that was hugely impacted by Cyclone Freddy. So it needs a lot of support, especially for those houses that were damaged. And in the recovery framework that we have, we've got about 192 million recovery needs just for the housing sector to make sure that the sector recovers properly. And we've also got some interventions currently being undertaken because of most of the flooding that happens in the cities. It's due to poor drainage system. So we are also constructing some of the drainage system to make sure that there's proper drainage system in the cities to prepare for the emergencies. And in terms of financing instruments, we have the National Disaster Risk Financing Strategy, which has highlighted a number of financial instruments that can benefit the urban cities. So this strategy has proposed multiple funding windows for resilience building, including for urban areas. And the policy that we are currently developing, that is at now almost finalized because it's at cabinet level for approval. It has got one of the key priority areas, policy priority area, focusing specifically on the urban population to make sure that we ensure that the urban population is resilient from emergencies. In terms of risk insurance, indeed, Malawi has benefited from the Africa Risk Capacity, and last year we just had the payout for drought, and now we are we are into the flood risk. So insurance, the role of the risk insurance for the urban resilience, that cannot be overemphasized. Currently, of course, not much has been done for the urban areas in terms of the risk insurance. But because the one that we've had is focusing on the rural areas, so we are calling out for the need to ensure that we find ways of bringing the risk insurance against hazards in these urban areas, where the impact we've seen that is also substantial as compared to the rural areas. And also the DRM, the Disaster Risk Management Act that I've mentioned about, has put in place funding mechanism, the Disaster Risk Management Trust Fund. So once this is operationalized, we are hoping that it's also going to support the country in terms of mobilizing resources, pulling resources together to make sure that we manage these disasters together with our partners. And also the need to engage the private sector, who are very active in the urban areas, so that they take the role in building urban resilience. Right now, we are in the process of developing a strategy for private sector engagement to make sure that we engage them when it comes to disasters, even beyond response phase, because usually the private sector is involved in humanitarian response mostly, not beyond the recovery phase. So we want them to be involved in even the recovery phase. And they need also to bring in more NGOs and UN players in the urban resilience sphere, as we've experienced that few resilience projects. We've got a few projects that are there in the urban, like the DG ECO that we have with UN Habitat, and the Disaster Risk Management for Resilience with UNDP that we are implementing, but we need more of such interventions to be undertaken in the urban areas to make sure that the urban is also resilient to emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. And with that, I just want to first give a reminder to our audience. We have fantastic panelists here. You will have the chance to ask some questions. I will ask a second round of questions to all the panelists, but in case you do have questions, give me 5 more minutes and then you'll get your chance to also ask, but already wanted to give you a heads up that this is coming. Thank you so much, Annie, for also highlighting the importance of evaluation plans and what you can learn out of this, because I think we often don't take a step back and then see what can we learn out of this and how can this inform how we move forward, and then also this importance of private sector engagement, and that this is an opportunity to also mobilize more money for really climate action on the ground. With that, I would like to ask all of you a second question. I'd like to keep it short and sweet, so we give some time to the audience. So if you can answer maybe 2 to 3 minutes, so we have a bit of space left for questions from the audience, and afterwards also a special question that I just thought about, which I will not reveal quite yet. So with that, let me go back to Kofi, to you, and you've also just heard a bit what the other panelists have said, and if there's anything you'd like to add, but also if you can share some of the capacity gaps of African governments at the national and the local level that you're seeing when it comes to effective disaster risk management, and how is ARC supporting these governments to gain access to the necessary knowledge, skills, and information. Kofi, over to you.
Thanks, moderator. Just to maybe shed light on the background, which really help set up African risk capacity. As you must know, currently how disaster is tackled. For instance, when disaster occurs, could it be drought, tropical cyclone, flood? Most of the time, African government rely on international aid, right? The government will just make an appeal just to mobilize resources. And sometimes those resources, as you know, they may come or not, or even if they come, it takes a lot of times. So African risk capacity was set up to bring that gap, to bridge that gap. How can we move from crisis management to proper preparedness? That's the purpose of creating African risk capacity. So what we usually do to build the capacity of our member state, AU member state, to fill that gap through risk modeling, as I mentioned earlier, we need to help our government model the risk that they face, at least those risks, drought, tropical cyclone, flood. And then the second most important also is to establish comprehensive operational plans, contingency plans, prior to even contracting insurance policies. So the operation plans actually stipulates the types of interventions a country may undertake in case, for instance, there is a disaster. So you don't wait when there is a disaster where run left and right to fund what type of intervention you need to conduct. So our work is to assist the member states to really develop that operation plans. You have the coordination mechanism, but also in terms of M&E system to ensure that if there is an event, at least the vulnerable community, the beneficiary, receive the attention that they need. We use the example of Madagascar operation plan for tropical cyclone, Batsira, for instance, where they have one activity that is in line with UN Habitat. For instance, how to build resilience, for instance, the houses against disaster. And that was highlighted in the operation plan. So when they receive payout as a result of Batsira, tropical cyclone Batsira, one of the interventions was to really build some sort of a community, multi-purpose community shelter, just to ensure that they are resilient to future events. Number three activity that we undertake also under capacity building is a risk transfer. Risk transfer is a really new concept, in Africa. So there is a need to build that culture for the government to understand what portion of the risk they face that they can retain based on the existing mechanism, and then what portions that they can transfer in the form of parametric insurance to ARC or to the international market. So we need to build that culture. We need to support the government, for instance, developing the disaster risk financing strategy. Malawi mentioned the disaster risk financing strategies to know the type of instrument they have available to respond to the type of disaster that they face. And our work is to support our government to really come up with those kind of strategies. We do believe in advocacy because to build that culture, you need a lot of advocacy from different level, from community level, but also policymakers level, member of parliaments, media. We need to really build a capacity to really, for them to understand the need of a proper preparedness against disaster. And we do believe in gender and disaster risk management because we know disaster affects people, men and women, differently. Then there is a need to really come up with sort of gender strategies. And our work, we ensure that disasters, gender is mainstream across all our project cycle. And lastly, all of this cannot be achieved if there is not proper partnership with Oxfam, partnership with the government, but UN Habitat, but also everyone. There is a saying, popular saying, which goes, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go with people. Because in the battle against climate change, we want to go far, and then there is a need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kofi. I think 100% agree. From crisis management to response, and I think, Fushina, this is your segue to say, what some examples that you have learned from your work on nature-based solutions that UN Habitat has worked on, and also really on building this urban climate resilience. Your 2 minutes.
Thanks, Leah. I'm really happy to have a question about nature-based solutions because I think that oftentimes when we're talking about urban resilience, there's so much focus on infrastructure. And it's important also to really understand that we need to work with nature and not against it. And certainly that is the case in cities, not only in rural areas. And in fact, I'm a big believer that Africa is the continent that is really the champion for nature-based solutions, for ecosystems-based adaptation, and where there is so much potential to use these kinds of innovations in cities. And I say innovations a little hesitantly because I feel like nature-based solutions are both, right? They're both innovations, and there's tremendous opportunity to innovate further. I mean, the potential is really unlimited. But at the same time, nature-based solutions are also harking back, right? I mean, it's going back to doing something that we already know works and that we already know is quite critical. So it's both an innovation and also both a traditional practice. It's a combination of those things. I think we've talked a lot about different challenges that are brought on by disasters, and it's important to note that nature-based solutions offer answers to a lot of those challenges, because not only do they have benefits in terms of managing and restoring ecosystems, but they also come with secondary benefits for the health and well-being of society, for reducing energy costs, for, of course, disaster prevention. So they are really holistic solutions. And the way that we see nature-based solutions are as part of a really fundamental part of integrated resilience building. So when we talk about, for example, city wrap, what we try to encourage throughout the process is for cities not just to look at capacity building and green and gray infrastructure needs, but to also look at how those things can be complemented with eco-DRR, nature-based solutions, ecosystems-based adaptation. And this needs to be very, very participatory as well, because communities need to understand why these interventions are being offered. They need to be part of planning them, and they absolutely need to be part of sustaining them, because nature-based solutions require community engagement. So just because I know time is short, to give one example, and I'd like to give an example of our work in Malawi, since we're focusing a lot of discussion on Malawi. We've been doing, as UN Habitat and together with Oxfam, a number of different nature-based approaches in 2 cities, in Malawi, in Zomba, and in Lilongwe, in the capital, as well. In Zomba, for example, and we know from Freddie that mudslides are an enormous issue. I mean, most of the impact in terms of the loss of lives and the damage to homes and infrastructure from Freddie actually was from the mudslides. Now, of course, we know that loss of vegetation leads to more mudslides, and one way to prevent mudslides is actually to restore forests and the natural ecosystem. In Zomba, during the city wrap process, we identified one area, for example, where there's a hill. Zomba's beautiful. It's a gorgeous hilly city, and there was a hill at the bottom of which there was a school. And there was some drainage on the hill, but of course, as the forests have been depleted, and also as the rains have become more intense, the drainage was no longer sufficient, and so the school was becoming flooded on a regular basis, which led to closures, which meant that the children were not able to be in school, which of course has all kinds of other secondary social impacts. And so we're rehabilitating the natural environment, the forest on the hills, to help the drainage and to prevent flooding. In Malawi, in Lilongwe, we did a combination of tree planting and also vegetative cover restoration in informal areas. And here as well, I mean, there was quite a lot to learn, and I mean, maybe we could talk about that in another session as well, about, again, the need for community participation, for the community to be part of the process so that they sustain those green areas, and also so that they make sure that those green areas are kept safe, and that we also understand all of the different implications. I think as much as there are benefits to nature-based solutions, of course there are challenges, and since financing is one of the topics here, I just wanted to end with saying that we really need to be better at understanding and communicating the social returns on investment of nature-based solutions, because I think that is really critical for us to be able to scale up their potential, and of course, in African cities and also beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, Rushina. We already spoke about gender, and I think many of the panelists have already mentioned that. Libo, can you talk about there's no economic and social and environmental justice if we don't take this gender lens and perspective into consideration. You already referred to it before. Can you expand a bit more on that aspect and how we can ensure that finance and innovation for urban resilience also takes into account the lens of gender justice and the role of women in that transformation?
Yes, I'm going to have to borrow your mic. Thank you. No, you can't. You really can't, but I won't be long. I mean, I think traditionally we have kept women and young people out of key decision making. And what working in partnerships with communities help us to do is to actually see the people that are often unseen. Because in a lot of cases, the decision makers, the ones that are sitting around the table, think from their own vantage point. For an example, they don't understand the impact of fetching water on women if there is a disaster. Issues of safety, issues of feeding their families, all that are tasks that are performed by women. But for many years, we've also appreciated and benefited from care work. But this kind of care work has not been compensated and it has not been seen. So we all assume that our children will be taken care of, our homes will be taken care of, the cooking, the cleaning, and all that is traditionally care work will happen. But we actually do not understand how that happens. And conversely, we also don't understand when a river runs dry, what are the impact on people in that community that normally go and fetch water? In countries like ours, where there is a lot of gender-based violence, what does it mean when there is a competition for resources? And the minute you leave out women out of this conversation, you also cannot understand, for an example, even when you rebuild a forest, what that impact on the women is going to be. And in urban areas, what you also don't have is then an appreciation of why, where people would have wanted to build, even if it's informal housing, what that means. If you then say you can't build there, you then need to rebuild a forest. And in many, many instances, including some of these solutions, and I really like the point that you made around, while this is innovation, we are going back. The people who are the bearers of these stories in Africa, where there has been a lot of migration, the people who know which crops used to prevent which disasters are women. So in fact, it is not only about making sure that those that are worst affected, and I often say, and I use the adage from the disability movement, nothing about us without us, and I think that should be adopted by everybody, but we need to see particularly women and young people as an asset, because there are so many other solutions that, because mainly in Africa, our cultures are oral, that may have been passed from generation to generation, that if you leave them out of the equation of what the solutions could be like, you would then not benefit from some of that knowledge that they have from their great-grandmothers and their mothers. But more importantly, you are then not able to deliver cities, an infrastructure that responds to their needs. How often have we seen, for an example, to deal with road accidents, that government will come and build a big bridge over a community, but in fact, the market is just across the street. Where other people are doing business or selling their goods is just across the street. And what happens? That becomes a white elephant, and people still cross the road and cause disasters. And that is a clear image of what happens when you plan and you don't integrate the ideas of those that will use the service but are most impacted on the issue that you are trying to mitigate on. And if you do that, particularly within climate change and trying to build resilient cities, you run the risk of building cities that are in many other African countries even resilient and that makes sense to less than half of the population, because in many other cities, women are in the majority. And so it does make sense that you bring them in and you understand how is that going to affect their livelihood? How is that going to affect their safety? What solutions do they have? And what are other creative ways? And that is why when I started speaking, I said, what this participatory public-private community partnerships help us to do is to reimagine governance. It is to reimagine the kind of cities that we can build going forward.
Thank you so much, Lebo. And maybe also to say, 100% agree that we need to ensure that women are part of that conversation, but how can we ensure that they're part of the conversation? If we plan these participatory processes, sometimes the times that these workshops will take place are during bedtimes when kids need to be put into bed, or something else that prevents women from attending these participatory processes. So that first step thinking, how can we bring women to that conversation to ensure that they're part of that conversation, is absolutely critical. And I said 2 minutes. Annie, last but not least, over to you. I mean, you talked already about disaster management, you talked about evaluation and planning and taking Malawi and Malawian cities into more into that planning process. Can you just expand a little bit more what has changed in the last 5 years, and how is Malawi innovating its planning to accommodate possible future climate scenarios? Over to you.
Thank you. So in the past 5 years, a lot has changed in terms of disaster risk management, like inclusion of the urban cities in disaster management. We are establishing now the disaster risk management structures. Previously, we did not have experts in the cities to make sure that there are desk officers working on the contingency planning as focal persons. Now we have desk officers in the cities responsible for disaster risk management. And we are establishing committees to make sure that they coordinate all the disaster risk management programs. So these committees, they range from the city level up to the ward level. We've got those structures in the urban areas. So disaster risk management committees are now being established, and they are now working. And with the cluster system approach as well that we are using to make sure that when disasters come, we respond accordingly and well coordinated. So those are some of the efforts that we've taken. We've included them, even with the lean season response program, we've included the cities to address the issues of urban poverty. And also the policy that we are now developing has put in place the mechanisms to make sure that there are deliberate efforts to ensure that disaster risks in urban areas are effectively managed. So the process of mapping and zoning of high-risk areas, and also prevention of settlement in those high-risk areas. So by enforcing some of the laws that we have in Malawi, to make sure that people don't settle in high-risk areas, and also developing the structural and non-structural measures to prevent the new risks, as well as reducing the existing risk in the urban areas. So some of the structural measures are the drainage systems that we've talked about, and also the city planning. We have got the safer housing construction guidelines, so promoting these guidelines to make sure that houses are constructed to be resilient to disasters. And we are strengthening the local structures in the urban area. So those are some of the interventions that we've been taking, and also to make sure that we put them in the planning process of everything that we do, including the urban and the rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, I do want to open up to see if there's any question from the audience. Do we have a mic? Otherwise, I'll just walk over to you. And if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you so much to the panelists for your inputs. My name is Nkateko Chauke, Programs Director at Oxfam South Africa. My question is to Kofi. If you could kindly share, we've reflected on the issues and we've also touched on the solutions from the part of communities and constituents that we work with. But it would be great to walk out of here with a sense of a concrete or tangible idea of how we could perhaps be channeling this finance from these institutions or investments, rather, that help to build anticipatory action within communities. How do we also integrate impact-based forecasting as well as part of the innovation aspects of response? So just to get a sense of your thinking, as well as where opportunities may potentially be in terms of these kinds of investments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comment is okay if it's short.
Thank you very much. Aisha Adams, parliamentarian from Malawi. Thank you very much, panelists. I just want to comment on what has already been said, more especially what Anna said from Malawi, because that's where I'm coming from. Indeed, the government is doing a lot together with our developmental partners in making sure that the people that were heavily affected by flood are assisted. But I'm telling you, that's not enough, because the damage that we went through was just too much. Imagine bridges, roads, houses being washed away, clinics. For us to put them together and to be the way we were, it's not that easy as a country. As you know that most of African countries are in an economic crisis. As we speak, government is making sure to distribute food to the less privileged families and those that were affected by the flood, as she already put it. But that's not enough. As we speak, most people are sleeping empty stomach, and we are told that even this year we may experience drought. Up to now, most of the country has not received the rains, and we've not yet planted. So just imagine, we don't have food, we are sleeping empty stomach, and the rains are not there. What are Malawians going to do? And just to comment Oxfam, indeed, Oxfam in Malawi have good relationship with women parliamentarians, and we call them a friend with no weather, because each time we need them, they are there for us. Just like other organizations, we really appreciate, but Malawi needs a lot of help. In the last just ended sitting of parliament, we nearly fought the agriculture minister, because each and every parliamentarian was asking for food for his or her people. So not only the relief food, but even the food that can come through ADMAC, so that our people should buy food at a lower price, because we don't have enough food and the prices have gone up because the demand is just high. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, and also especially for highlighting, maybe talking about climate, but we also need to take into consideration really the nexus with other topics and the impacts that climate change has on our food system, on our water system, and so on. Kofi, that gave you a little bit more time to think about the answer to the question, but we are running out of time, so if you can be really short.
Yes, no, just very quickly.
Interpretation
I mentioned part of the answers during my last interventions in terms of operation plans. Right, when countries develop the national operation plans to ARC, that's where we need to ensure that within the operation plan development, we have this kind of inclusion where, you know, the local communities is also included in terms of the type of interventions that they need. So that's the part that we really want to make sure that, you know, those kind of things are highlighted. But also process evaluations, because you may ask yourself, for instance, when there is a payout, money goes to the community, how do we ensure that the most vulnerable really get the attention that they need? So we commissions every time when government receives a payout, a sort of financial reconciliation, but also process evaluations conducted by an independent body to really ensure that if, for instance, Malawi received 14.2 million last year, those 14.2 million, as highlighted in operation plans, reach out to the beneficiaries. But in terms of financing your the second part of your questions, that's what I mentioned, partnership. How do you partner, how do you work together to ensure that on all our work stream, from risk modeling, right, we have the right tools, the right model to respond to the needs of our countries. Insurance is about paying premium. How do you partner with donors, partners like African Development Bank, to ensure that we support our government? And most of our member states receive premium support from our donors and our partners. And that's the money that we have to support our member states. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And to close our panel, I'd like to give each of you my special question. One word that sums up this discussion for you, and one word that also sums up, these climate negotiations that we're seeing here at COP28. What's the one word that you really want to give to the negotiators? One. I'll start at my very right.
Okay, one word. For the loss and damage pledges that have been done here, at least to be accessible to the communities, to be operationalized, so that we see the outcomes of this COP28 being implemented in the rural communities. Thank you.
Fantastic, Pushina.
Could I have two?
Fine.
Multi-level action.
If you put a dash in between, that's still one word. Kofi.
Commitment.
Ibom. Oh, sorry.
Action and accountability.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. A round of applause for the panelists. And thank you for being here. We're looking forward to continuing this.